It's good to
Thank
see you.
I was so excited. I'm like, yes, it's so good to see you as well.
Well, no, I'm happy to be here, and thank you for that kind introduction, and thank you to Demand Justice for convening this session, bringing us all together. This is an incredible panel of repro justice warriors and abortion storytellers that have come together this afternoon. All of these battles are intrinsically linked. If you care about voting rights, if you care about housing rights, if you care about combating gun violence, ostensibly, if you care about justice and freedom in any iteration, including reproductive freedom, you should care about court expansion, because these issues are intrinsically linked, and we must do everything in our power to restore balance to the court and to ensure that the Supreme Court is actually working on behalf of the people. Because right now, they have been ruling with the absence of justice, and they have not been on the side of the people, which is exactly why Congress has had to step up and to stand in the gap. But we need to expand the courts. So it is an honor to join you at this virtual table today to talk about how we do that. Very proud to be your sibling in the movement and the work of justice. And I'm glad to be here and eager to get started.
Awesome. Thank you so much. We couldn't be more proud to stand next to you in this fight. So I have a few questions for you this morning to really get our conversation started. So as you know, 2021 has been the most devastating year for abortion rights since the Supreme Court guaranteed the right in 1973 in Roe v. Wade. What's happening in Texas with SB 8 is just the most extreme version of what's happening in states across the country. What do you think is motivating these laws, and what will likely be their effect?
Yeah, well, I mean, this is the culmination really of a decade's worth of calculated and coordinated attacks. It's been really sort of a slow boil, if you will, from anti-abortion lawmakers across the country. It is exactly why elections matter at every level. SB 8 and the other state bans and restrictions, again, have been a coordinated and growing attack from our state legislatures. And let's be clear, the catastrophic consequences have always been targeted on our most vulnerable. By creating these bans and these restrictions, it certainly doesn't mean that all birthing persons will stop having abortions. It simply means that what we're pushing out of their reach are safe, necessary, legal abortions, medical care, abortion care, which is health care. And we're putting it out of reach for our most vulnerable, our lowest income sisters, our queer, trans, and non-binary siblings, Black, Latinx, AAPI, immigrants, disabled, Indigenous people. And none of this happens by happenstance. It is all very precise. So like the roots of the anti-abortion movement, you said, what's the motivation behind this? At the root and at the core, it's what is at the root of most injustices that seek to exact precise harm on the most vulnerable: patriarchy and white supremacy. And that's true whether you're talking about SB 8 or you're talking about federal coverage bans like the Hyde Amendment. So these anti-choice lawmakers, they're motivated by one thing and one thing only, and that's finding any way possible to chip away at abortion rights as they await their chance to capitalize on an ultra-conservative majority on the Supreme Court to overturn Roe v. Wade, settled law that 80% of Americans don't want to see overturned. So we see this playing out right before our eyes. And SCOTUS is now scheduled to take up the Mississippi 16-week ban law in a matter of weeks. And this law was intentionally crafted by Republicans to reverse Roe v. Wade. So the stakes here just keep getting higher, honestly.
No, absolutely. And thank you for connecting the dots, right? Like abortion bans don't come in a silo, it's a part of a broader strategy rooted in white supremacy and patriarchy. So you recently spoke before the House Oversight Committee and you said abortion care is a constitutional right and that Congress and the White House must do everything possible to protect and guarantee it as such. I couldn't agree more. Can you tell us why this issue is so important to you and to your constituents and to their communities?
Sure. Again, the injustices are coordinated, precise, codified in our laws, sadly strengthened by our courts. It's all intersectional, the injustices and these fights. So I see the fight to protect abortion rights and to advance reproductive freedom as an economic justice issue. I see it as a racial justice issue. And so when we say that we're in the midst of a national reckoning on racial injustice, that has to mean something. If that is true, then the only receipts that matter in this moment are policies and budgets, and how intentional and unapologetic we are in dismantling systems of oppression and taking a stand against discriminatory policies wherever they exist. Since our nation's founding, those in power have created these systems and structures of oppression, again, that have exacted very precise intentional hurt and harm on our communities, particularly on Black women and women of color. And those structures have dictated who receives critical, high quality health care. Wealth, and who, by virtue of those resources, has the most basic right to bodily autonomy. So I believe we have to be just as precise in legislating equity, in legislating healing, in legislating justice as those powers that be have been precise and intentional in exacting hurt and harm. And then certainly, just as I close, I'll say as a Black woman, this is personal. We have a Black maternal morbidity crisis that continues to rob us of Black mamas at nearly 3 times the rate of white women. My paternal grandmother, who I never had the privilege of meeting and getting to know, she died in the 1950s, giving birth to my father's youngest brother. And so the fact that, here we are in 2021 and Black women would still be 4 times more likely to die in childbirth or in post-delivery complications is unacceptable. So when we push comprehensive reproductive health care out of reach, including abortion care out of reach, it really only stands to exacerbate these health disparities. It compounds the economic insecurities that so many Black and brown communities are experiencing, especially in the midst of an ongoing pandemic, which has wrought unprecedented, disparate trauma onto our communities. Our communities have bore the brunt of this pandemic-induced recession. And we're the ones that stand to lose the most in this fight to preserve a constitutional right, which is abortion care, which is health care. So from El Paso, Texas, to Jackson, Mississippi, to Somerville, Massachusetts, our destinies are truly tied.
Absolutely. And thank you so much for sharing that about your family. I think that this is an issue that impacts so many of us in so many ways. And as we were talking about legislation, you along with your colleague, Representative Chu, are a co-lead of the Women's Health Protection Act, which recently passed the House. Can you briefly tell us what that legislation will do?
Absolutely. Just for a quick digression, I just want to say that, representation matters. And it doesn't matter, for photo ops or so we can pat ourselves on the back about how much progress we've made. The reason why you need a diverse representation of lived experience has everything to do with the power of the lawmaking pen. It's about the impact that it has in our policy. So I just want to acknowledge Congresswoman Judy Chu, who has been since 2013 introducing the Women's Health Protection Act, because she knew a moment like this would come when we would need to fight this fight and take this battle on and to codify Roe v. Wade on the federal level. And so I want to thank her for the power of her representation, thank her for her leadership. And so the Women's Health Protection Act, WIPA, simply put, it will establish in federal law the right for doctors to provide individuals to receive abortion care free from political interference and medical unnecessary restrictions and bans. So it's just codifying Roe v. Wade on the federal level, affirming bodily autonomy, and a pregnant person's access to abortion care should not depend on where they live. So what WIPA does is it ensures that this right is enshrined in federal law, no matter how you, enshrined in federal law for everyone, no matter how you show up in the world, and that your access to abortion care, which is health care, not be dictated by geography. So it's codifying Roe v. Wade on the federal level, and then it's banning the introduction of state laws like the one in Texas. So Congress must act. We passed this bill out of the House, and I just want to take another moment of privilege here and to speak to the power of representation, not only in elected officials, but in our offices. And I want to give a shout out to my legislative director, a proud Latina, Isa Conchola, who was really instrumental to it being possible for us to get WIPA to the floor for a vote. We had to whip those votes. And so I want to acknowledge her laboring in love to advance reproductive freedom and justice. So the House has passed the Women's Health and Protection Act, and now I'm calling on Senator Schumer to bring WIPA to the floor for a vote. We should abolish the filibuster to do so. And we need to get this bill to President Biden's desk for signature. So we can't stop with WIPA. We also need to pass budgets that are clean of the racist coverage bans like the Hyde Amendment, which I referenced earlier, and finally affirm that abortion care is a fundamental right that must be guaranteed to all.
Yes, that's so true. Thank you for your leadership on that, and to your team's leadership and vision on that work. Once we pass WIPA, we also need to think about the Supreme Court, which is what brings us here today.
That's right.
Can you tell us why you decided to endorse this idea of court expansion, and how in particular you think it's necessary to protect abortion access and expand reproductive justice?
Well, again, as I was saying in my top remarks, that the extremism of the Supreme Court has proven time and time again that they are not on the side of the people. Whether you're talking about voting rights, whether you're talking about housing rights, whether you're talking about reproductive freedom, they are in fact obstructing justice. And so we have to balance out the extremism of these Supreme Courts. Over the last several years, we've witnessed unprecedented efforts by Republicans to stack the court with hostile justices that are truly only interested in advancing a far-right partisan agenda. And we continue to see the drastic and adverse consequences and impacts of that on real people. This is incredibly consequential. And so I was very proud, and I commend Congressman Johnson and Jones for their leadership in this regard. I was proud to join them as a champion to the Judiciary Act, because we need to be exploring every legislative option on the table to restore a balance to the court and to ensure that SCOTUS is back in the business of exacting justice. And the fact is that the Constitution leaves it to Congress to set the number of Supreme Court justices. So it's within our bandwidth and our jurisdiction, and it's also not precedent setting. We've done this before. We've done it 7 times. People don't know that. They try to marginalize and radicalize this issue and make it as if it's some sort of fringe solution. But we have the authority, and we have the precedent of history on our side. So faith in our government is at stake, and the fight to preserve our democracy is at stake. The fight to preserve our fundamental rights are at stake, whether you're talking about abolishing the filibuster or expanding the courts.
That's absolutely right. We need to use every tool on the table to protect and defend our democracy. At Demand Justice, we launched an ambitious organizing program this year to really talk to your colleagues so they can hear directly from their constituents about how important it is to co-sponsor the Judiciary Act and expand the Supreme Court. And one of our asks for our friends here at Netroots Nation who have joined us today is to join us for our lobby day on October the 26th in Washington, D.C. Could you talk to us about why it's so important to organize and how your constituents' opinions inform the positions you take on this legislation?
Sure. First, I just want to say how much, and I've said this before, as someone who's an only child who grew up in an activist and organizing household, and my mother rests in peace and power. She played many roles in community and in society, but the one that is the most defining for me is that she was a tenants' rights organizer. And so I grew up in an organizing household, and I grew up in a movement building household, and I love the chosen family that we find along the way, people aligned in one common purpose and goal. So movement building and organizing is essential. That's why I'm here today. I've always maintained, because my mother role modeled this and taught me this, that the power of the people has always been greater than the people in power. And some see that as a contradiction because technically I'm in a seat of power. But I'd like to think that the reason I'm in that seat is because I know where the real power lies, and it's with the people. I wouldn't be in this seat were it not for the power of people-powered movements. They've always been at the forefront of transformative, substantive social change. And I think, our sibling in the movement, Latasha Brown, really says it best when she says that organized power is realized power. So, that's why we can't let up.
Thank you so much for that. And so my last question for you, you've given us so many great gems already, but I think that in this moment, this can feel very hopeless, this fight to protect our bodies and our democracy. Can you offer some hopeful words to those of us who are out here on the front lines protecting and defending our democracy right now?
Yeah, well, I'll quote another sibling in the movement, a dear friend, Brittany Patna Cunningham. And it's something that she said at the height of the pandemic, which I've internalized. And it's a quote that I revisit often. And she said that, I choose to practice the discipline of hope over the ease of cynicism. And it was a reminder to me that hope isn't this organic thing. It is a discipline. It is something that has to be practiced. And, whenever I feel defeated and weary, I lean on the strength of this movement. That's what emboldens me. And the stories that we've heard and the hardships that we see up close and personal every day. No doubt about it, the challenges we face are steep, but I believe our responsibility and the opportunity is far greater. We have to stand in the gap. And again, there's joy in this work, in the work of community building and movement building. There's radical joy in the work of system change and transformation. I think people often misunderstand our righteous rage and indignation at these injustices, but that righteous rage is rooted in radical love. So it's the radical love, it's the righteous fights we take on, it's the strength of our movement family that keep me going. And it's the reminder that hope is a practice and it is a discipline. So I do, just as I close, I want to show some love to the movement and thank all the organizers, the activists, the disruptors, the agitators, the persisters and champions in the fight, like Demand Justice, like Congresswoman Chu, my big sister, Congresswoman Barbara Lee, our colleagues on the pro-choice caucus. This is the first pro-choice majority Congress in the history of Congress. And because of the work that we did, we passed a funding bill free of abortion restrictions like the Hyde Amendment and like the Helms Amendment. That's been work that's been in the works for many, many years. But we finally have a pro-choice majority Congress, and that is more than a talking point. It means something. We've passed WIPA. We passed a funding bill free of abortion restrictions like the Hyde Amendment, like the Helms Amendment. And that is all a testament and a strength to the movement. None of this happened overnight, as Coretta Scott King reminds us, freedom is something that we earn in every generation. So, I seek to be more than an ally to all of you. I seek to be a co-conspirator in the work of justice. And I'm proud to do this work alongside you as we continue to not only change the narrative, but to change consciousness and to change laws and to change our country. I also want to say the great thing about movement building are all the people you meet along the way that you are aligned in the work of justice, but other things too. I just want to do a shout out to Eric, who did a shout out to Howard about eating some gooey butter cake. So, I say policy is my love language, but so is cake. Michael Harriet did a tweet this morning that said, can we normalize pound cake as birthday cake? Who is about that? Okay. I am about that.
I've never made a piece of cake I didn't like. So yes.
I'll try to listen. And I'll try to tell you, wherever they say, in organizing spaces, if you feed them, you can lead them.
A word.
Okay, so I can't wait till we can all be together in person, and I'm gonna make sure we have some good cake there. I'm talking about some 7-Up cake. Who know about 7-Up cake?
Okay,
anyway,
Congresswoman, we could be here all day talking about cake. Yes. Sign me up for that meeting.
But protect Roe, expand the court, and don't ask for justice, y'all. Demand it. Okay. All right. Thank you, Tara. Good to be with you.
Thank you so much, Congresswoman. I think that just goosebumps. And also, I think something that just resounding is like, these things are not coincidences. We work really hard. We organize very hard in our communities, with our neighbors, with our families to make these wins possible. And then also we are winning, right? And that having hope that we can win more is what this is all about. So thank you once again for being a champion and a partner and a conspirator along this journey.
You got it. Appreciate you, sis. Take care, everyone.